He left me after 20 years to marry his secretary. Then his fathers will erase his inheritance. He poured the wine like it was date night. Then told me he wanted out. You don't expect your life to change over mushroom risotto. But mine did. We've been married 20 years, 20. Through kids, careers, sickness, cross-country moves. I thought we were entering the quiet phase of our life. The gentle glide into old age. I thought wrong. Derek had made reservations at Marlowe's Bistro, this intimate little place in downtown Savannah. Candlelight. Soft jazz. The works. He even wore that navy jacket I'd bought him for our anniversary last year, the one he'd said was too formal for work. So of course I thought something was up, but in a good way. I'd gotten my test results back that morning. The lump I'd felt wasn't nothing. It was early-stage breast cancer. Treatable, but scary. I hadn't told anyone yet. I figured I'd wait until after dinner, after we clinked glasses, laughed about Zoe's latest dorm drama, maybe even split dessert. Then I'd gently break the news. Instead, Derek beat me to it. Before we go further, don't forget to like this story, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Not with concern, not with support, but with the words, Evelyn. I need space. I blinked at him. Space? I asked, like I hadn't heard right. He exhaled like he was the one carrying something heavy, like this was the hard part for him. I've been unhappy for a while, he said, not meeting my eyes. We've grown apart. I think we both feel it. I laughed. Couldn't help it. You're breaking up with me? Let's not be dramatic, he said. I put down my fork. We're married, Derek. This isn't prom night. He didn't flinch. That's when I knew he'd rehearsed this. Probably more than once. That tone, that posture, it wasn't spontaneous. Then he added, there's someone else. I swear the entire room went silent. She's younger, he said. And before you say anything, it didn't start while we were still us. Not really. I didn't mean for it to happen. You know that moment when you feel your heartbeat in your ears, but everything else goes quiet? That was me. Right there, between the candles and the untouched breadbasket. The worst part? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even ask who she was. Because I already knew. Sierra Monroe. His secretary. The 28-year-old who giggled too loudly during Zoom calls and left perfume that smelled like sugar cookies in the guest bathroom. I sat back. Sipped my wine. Are you sure? I asked calmly. He looked thrown. About what? That you want a divorce. That this is what you're willing to blow up your life over. I want a chance to be happy, he said. I nodded slowly. Then I took another sip and smiled. You'll get your chance. We drove home in silence. The kind that makes your skin itch. His hand stayed at 10 and 2 like a student driver. I stared out the window, running my finger along the glass like I was drawing maps to a new life. At home, he didn't follow me into the bedroom. He slept in the den. By morning, he'd already packed a bag. I watched him load it into his car, kiss me on the cheek like he was heading off to a golf weekend, and then he drove away. And just like that, my life split in two. Before, wife of Derek Whitcomb, respected architect, loving father, charming son of Savannah royalty. After, woman left behind like a jacket that didn't fit anymore. But here's the thing about being left at 51. You don't panic. You remember. You remember who you were before you became someone else's better half. You remember every time you made yourself small so someone else could feel big. You remember what it's like to rebuild. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to call Sierra in a rage or slash Derek's tires. I wasn't going to let cancer or heartbreak be the headline of my story. No, I went to work. I attended my oncology consultation. I started treatment. And then I made a quiet phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Walter Whitcomb, Derek's father. A retired federal judge with a legacy as sharp as his suits and a memory like steel. We hadn't spoken much since the kids grew up. But I'd taken care of him after his second stroke, while Derek was out on project sites for weeks at a time. I'd been there when he fell. I'd taken him to his cardiologist. I even arranged in-home PT. He picked up after the second ring. Evelyn, he said, surprised. I need to talk, I said. About Derek. About the divorce. He was silent for a beat. Then, come by tomorrow morning. We have a lot to discuss. I didn't know it at the time, but that call, it would change everything. Not just for me, but for Derek. Because Walter Whittemore didn't forget what loyalty looked like. And he didn't take betrayal lightly, especially not when his legacy was on the line. He left me for someone new. But his father never removed me from the will. Walter Whittemore lived in a brick colonial on Oakline Street, old Savannah money, inherited prestige, the kind of house that smelled like expensive leather and unopened books. When I pulled into the circular driveway, I half expected a maid to answer the door. But Walter opened it himself. Thinner than I remembered. Slower, but still sharp-eyed and commanding in a way that didn't need volume. "Elena's girl," he said with a small smile. "Elena was my mother," I reminded him softly. "I'm Evelyn." "Right," he nodded, stepping aside. "But you always reminded me of her." He led me into the study, a dark wood-paneled room that hadn't changed in 30 years. The same globe bar in the corner. Same silver-framed military photos. Same high-back chair where Walter used to sit and dictate his will to his lawyer while Derek and his sister Naomi bickered about trust funds in the hallway. I sat across from him, legs crossed, hands calm. "You know about the divorce?" I asked. He gave a short grunt. "Derek called last night. Said you were being surprisingly cooperative." Which is his way of saying too quiet to control. That made me smile a little. "I'm not looking to start a war," I said. "I just need you to know something before you make any changes to your estate." He raised a brow. "You think I'd disinherit you just because my son lost his mind?" I blinked. Walter took a sip of his tea and leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Evelyn, I never took your name off the will." I sat there, stunned. "But I assumed—" "You assumed wrong," he cut in. "You were the only one who ever showed up when it mattered. When my hip gave out, you were the one driving me to appointments. Not Derek. Not Naomi. Not a damn soul in this family but you. But legally, if we're divorced—" "Ah," he said, raising a finger. "That's where it gets interesting." He reached over to the side table, pulled out a folder marked Amendment, Whittemore Legacy Trust, and flipped it open. "There's a clause," he said. "A moral clause." I stared at the paper, scanning the lines. "If my heir is found guilty of moral misconduct within 1 year preceding my death, including but not limited to adultery, abuse, financial coercion, or any public action that brings disrepute to the family name, their inheritance will be suspended for a period of 10 years or redirected at my discretion." He smiled at me, all teeth. "I added it 5 years ago, after Naomi's third scandal." "And you think Derek qualifies?" I asked. Walter chuckled darkly. He didn't even bother to hide it. "Brought that secretary to the last foundation dinner like she was the first lady. Told people you'd mutually separated weeks before he even served you papers." He shook his head. "I may be old, Evelyn, but I'm not stupid, and I won't reward that kind of cowardice." I stared at the clause. Read it again. Then again. "Would it stand in court?" I asked. "I vetted it with 3 different firms," Walter said, "including the one you referred me to after my stroke, remember?" I did. "I wanted to call and tell you after he left," he said. "But I figured you needed time to breathe. I wasn't about to be another man trying to control your narrative. That nearly broke me." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. He leaned back. "Because I'm dying." The words landed like stone. "Heart failure. End stage. Could be 6 months. Could be 6 weeks." I said nothing. Just sat with the weight of it. He went on. "And because I want to give you something no one in this family has ever given you, a choice." We talked for another hour. Not just about Derek or the will, but life. Regret. The way men in his generation were raised to mistake silence for strength. Before I left, he handed me a second envelope. "This one's for you," he said. "Private inheritance. Separate from the main estate. Won't trigger any litigation. Think of it as reparations." I didn't look at it until I got home. Inside was a cashier's check. $150,000. Memo line, "For when you're ready to begin again." That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, the envelope in my lap. Derek had replaced me in under a year. But Walter? Walter had never stopped seeing me. He saw the quiet loyalty, the thankless care, the meals, the appointments, the nights I stayed up managing medication and doctors and his ridiculous brandy addiction. And now? Now he'd handed me the power Derek thought he'd taken. Not as revenge, but as recognition. 3 days later, Derek called. Not to apologize. to gloat. "You'll be getting the first draft of the papers soon," he said. "Let's try to keep things civil, all right?" I said nothing, just smiled at the memory of Walter's words. Because Derek had no idea that while he was planning a wedding, I was holding his future in a folder. He left to start a new life, so I decided to reclaim mine. There's something oddly liberating about being left. Once the shock wears off, and it does, slowly, like mist rising off the water, you're left with space. Space to breathe, to think, to ask yourself the question most women in long marriages never dare to ask: what do I want now? It took me a while to realize the answer wasn't him back. The first thing I did was change my name. Not legally, yet, but I stopped signing things as Evelyn Wickemort. The first time I scrawled Evelyn Hart again, my hands trembled. That was my maiden name, my mother's name, the name I used before I became someone's wife, someone's secretary, someone's silent support system. I made the switch on my email, then my voicemail. Then I went to the DMV and filed the paperwork. A small act, but it felt like stepping out of an old skin. Next, I made a list. A real list. Not a grocery list. Not chores. Just things I hadn't done in 20 years because Derek always said they were impractical or a waste of money. Repaint the kitchen bright yellow, take pottery classes, spend a weekend alone in the mountains, learn how to make espresso without a pod machine, host a dinner party for my friends. Not ours. Wear red lipstick in the daytime. Try therapy. That last one felt indulgent, but also necessary. My first therapy session was a telehealth call with a woman named Malaya. Mid-40s. Sharp voice. Soft eyes. I told her everything. About the dinner. The wine. The "I need space" speech. Sierra. Walter's will. She didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She just asked, "And what do you want now, Evelyn?" I paused. Not for dramatic effect, because no one had asked me that in years. And not just about the divorce. About anything. In therapy, we talked about emotional invisibility. The slow erosion of self-worth when your needs always come second. The grief that doesn't come with death, but with betrayal. We talked about how I'd spent 20 years being available instead of alive, and how that ends now. Meanwhile, Savannah kept spinning. Derek's name started popping up more and more, online, at fundraisers, in conversations at the grocery store. "Did you hear? He's engaged already. Sierra's pregnant, apparently. She's got him on a kale juice cleanse. Evelyn must be devastated." I wasn't. I was annoyed, sure, but not devastated. Because I wasn't mourning a good marriage. I was mourning the illusion of one. I started visiting Cypress Point again, the lake cabin Derek's father bought for the family 20 years ago. Derek used to hate it. No Wi-Fi. Too many bugs. Rustic, he called it, with an eye roll. I loved it. So I called Walter. "Mind if I take a few weekends up there?" I asked. "It's yours," he said simply. I went that weekend with a bottle of wine and a journal. Sat on the porch. Listened to the cicadas. Wrote for the first time in years. That night, I slept like a woman who'd been pulled from a sinking ship and was finally breathing air again. A week later, Naomi, Derek's sister, called. "Don't hang up," she said immediately. I didn't. She took a deep breath. "I'm not picking sides. But Derek's planning something big." "Like what?" "An engagement party. Public. Splashy. At Cypress Point." My blood froze. "You're joking." "I wish I was. He doesn't know you've been going. Doesn't care. He's calling it a new chapter celebration." I stayed quiet. Then she added, "It's scheduled for 2 weeks from now." I thanked her, hung up, and laughed. Not bitterly. Triumphantly. Because here's the part Derek didn't know. Walter had already signed over Cypress Point to me. The cabin, the property, the title, mine. No ceremony. Just a quiet transfer at the courthouse. A thank you from a dying man who knew where loyalty lived. And Derek? He was about to throw an engagement party on land he no longer owned. I didn't call him. Didn't warn him. Didn't text Naomi back. Instead, I called Lenora Blackwell, my old college roommate and now a renowned event planner in Atlanta. "Think you can help me throw a little gathering?" I asked. She chuckled. "Evelyn Hart throwing a party? Hell yes. Tell me everything." And so we planned. Not to show off. Not to be petty. But to reclaim what was mine before someone else stomped their name all over it. By the end of the week, I had a guest list. People who knew me, loved me, supported me. No fake smiles. No Savannah socialites. Just friends. Chosen family. And me, not the ex-wife. Not the scorned woman. Not the whisper behind someone else's scandal. Evelyn, standing on her own land. In her own name. With the folder still tucked away. Waiting. He thought he was celebrating a new chapter. I reminded him whose book he was in. There are two kinds of women people underestimate. The ones who never raise their voice, and the ones who keep receipts. I happen to be both. And now, I had a folder full of legal documentation, an inherited lakeside property, and a man so deep in his own ego, he was planning an engagement party on land he didn't even own anymore. The week leading up to the party was oddly calm. I'd already coordinated with Lenora about everything: setup, catering, music, guest access. No drama. No chaos. Just quiet intention. The event I was hosting wasn't scheduled for Derek's party day. It was the day before. Saturday night. I called at the gathering. No announcements. No Instagram invites. Just friends. Former colleagues. Walter's old law partners. 2 women from my pottery class. One of my oncology nurses. People who saw me. Not as Derek's ex, just Evelyn. When Friday came, I drove to Cypress Point alone. The air smelled like pine and lake water. I opened every window, lit lavender candles, turned on Ella Fitzgerald, and sat barefoot on the porch. And for the first time in years, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. That night, we set the tables with string lights and wildflowers. Lenora's team was flawless. Quiet, efficient, elegant. By 7 p.m., the lawn was filled with soft laughter, jazz, the clink of wine glasses. Someone played acoustic guitar by the dock. I wore a deep green wrap dress, barefoot still, hair down. No Spanx. No makeup beyond lipstick. I didn't want to look like a woman reborn. I just wanted to look like myself. Around 9:30, as I refilled someone's drink, I saw a black SUV slow down at the edge of the property. Derek's car. He was early. The party wasn't until Sunday, his party. And yet, there he was. Windows down. Sierra in the passenger seat. Blonde hair like a shampoo commercial, smiling before she saw me. He parked. He got out. No wave. Just confusion. "Ev," he called out. I walked calmly to the edge of the driveway, wine glass in hand. "Derek, what the hell is going on?" "A gathering," I said simply. "Why are you here?" I tilted my head. "Why wouldn't I be? This is my event space." "No, Derek. It's not." I reached into the woven clutch at my side and handed him a copy of the property deed. Dated. Signed. Filed. My name at the top. His face. He went white. Then red. "You're joking." "No," I said, "but you've been. For months." Sierra stepped out. "Derek, what's happening?" He didn't answer. I turned to her. "You've scheduled a party here on Sunday, but I'm afraid the owner hasn't given approval." "You're not the owner." I raised my eyebrows. "Walter signed it over to me a month ago. I have the deed. I've lived here every weekend. Paid taxes. Paid insurance. This is mine, Sierra." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something smug, but there was nothing to say. She hadn't done her homework. Derek pulled me aside. He lowered his voice like he could still manage this. "Why would my father give you this house?" "Because I earned it," I said. "Because I took care of him when you didn't. Because I didn't abandon him for cocktail hours and PR photo ops." "This is insane, Ev." "No," I said. "This is consequence." The next morning, I woke to an email from his assistant. Not Sierra. Another one. I think her name was Melanie. It said, "Hello, Miss Hart. Due to a scheduling oversight, we'll be relocating the Whitcomb engagement celebration to another venue. Thank you for your time." Short. Cold. Defeated. That was enough for me. But then, I got a call from Naomi. She was laughing. "You really did it," she said between chuckles. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I just stopped letting people do things to me." She asked if she could stop by that afternoon. I said yes. She brought wine. We sat on the dock with our feet in the water. She clinked my glass. "I hope you know, no one's ever done that to Derek before. I didn't do it to hurt him." "I know." She paused. "But you did hurt him. And he deserved it." I stayed one more night at Cypress Point. Just me. No event staff. No guests. Just a good book and a bottle of Malbec. At one point, I stepped out into the yard barefoot, staring up at the stars, and whispered, "This is mine now. Not just the house. The stillness. The life." Before I left, I folded Derek's party RSVP list into the fire pit. Watched the names curl into ash. People who once overlooked me. People who'd now whisper about me at brunch. Let them. Let them whisper. Let them see a woman who didn't burn things down out of rage. She reclaimed what was already hers. He inherited the last name. I inherited the legacy. It happened on a Tuesday. The call came just after sunrise. Walter Whitcomb, former judge, father, husband, and my unexpected ally, was gone. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful. In his sleep. I stared at the phone for a long time after. Not crying. Not in shock. Just processing. It was strange. I wasn't part of the family anymore. Not on paper. But Walter had made it clear who he still considered family. And now, everything he'd quietly set in motion, it was about to activate. The memorial was scheduled for Friday. Classic Savannah affair. Black dresses, dark sunglasses, hushed gossip over cucumber sandwiches, and white roses. The Whitcomborts rented out the historic Harrington Hall for the service, same place Derek and I had our wedding reception 23 years ago. I almost didn't go, but then I got the formal letter. The reading of the will shall take place immediately following the memorial at Whitcomb and Sons Law Office, East Bay Street. And just below that, Evelyn Hart, attendance requested. Not optional. Requested. By Walter. Before he died. When I walked into the service, heads turned. I wore a navy wrap dress. Pearl earrings. Not flashy. Not defiant. Just dignified. Naomi smiled when she saw me. Luca and Zoe, Derek's kids, whispered something I couldn't hear. Sierra froze. She was seated in the family row, right where I used to sit. One hand on Derek's wrist. She looked good, in a calculated way. Like she'd watched YouTube tutorials on funeral makeup that looks expensive. Derek's jaw tightened the moment he saw me. I gave him a polite nod. Nothing more. The service was fine. Speeches. Bible verses. A slideshow of Walter's life. They skipped most of the later years. The ones where I was the one by his side. No matter. Because the slideshow wasn't the inheritance. The will was. By 2 p.m., we were seated in the Whitcomb law office. Long table. Too much cologne. A tray of sweating water bottles. Walter's lawyer, a thin, serious man named Carl, opened his folder and cleared his throat. This will supersedes all prior versions. Signed and notarized 3 months ago. He began with the usual, small gifts to caregivers, donations to libraries and veterans organizations. Then came the big one. To my son, Derek Whitcomb, all eyes locked on him. Sierra squeezed his hand. My personal property, including artwork, golf clubs, and coin collection. Derek smirked. Carl continued. However, due to a violation of the moral conduct clause outlined in Section B, Paragraph 4, I am enacting the clause's full penalty. Derek's financial inheritance shall be suspended for a period of 10 years, with the option for review by the estate trustee at year 5. The room went silent. During this period, the funds originally allocated to Derek shall be redirected into a managed trust, overseen by Evelyn Hart, to be distributed at her discretion. Sierra's hand dropped from his. Derek stood. What the hell is this? Carl remained calm. It's in the clause. Signed and witnessed. Your father filed the paperwork after confirming your misconduct through public and private sources. You can't be serious. He was. And legally, he still is. Sierra turned to him. You told me the clause didn't mean anything. He didn't respond. Then Carl turned to me. And finally, I held my breath. To Evelyn Hart, for her years of service, care, and quiet loyalty, I bequeath full ownership of Cypress Point, an immediate cash sum of $250,000, and trustee authority over the Whitcomb Legacy Foundation, as outlined in Appendix C. I blinked. The entire room did. Sierra scoffed. This is a joke. Derek's face had gone bloodless. I didn't speak. I just nodded. Carl closed the folder. That concludes the reading. The chairs scraped back slowly. No one said much. But as I stood, I passed Derek without looking at him. Sierra followed me into the hallway. She hissed. You really couldn't just let him go, could you? I turned. I did let him go, I said. He's the one who thought he could rewrite the ending. Turns out, Walter already wrote it. She glared. I walked away. Outside, Naomi was waiting. She looked me up and down. You okay? I exhaled. Yeah, I said. Weirdly. I am. She smiled. Guess you're the one with the legacy now. No, I said. I'm the one with a future. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine and the folder in front of me. I thought about Walter. About the cabin. About every moment I doubted my worth because someone else didn't value it. And now? Now the scales had balanced. Not through revenge, but through recognition. And you know what? I didn't feel powerful. I felt free. They thought the silence meant I lost. But silence was the decision. A month after the will reading, Savannah had moved on. Parties. Fundraisers. Gossip about who would take over the Whitcomb Foundation now that Derek was indisposed. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. He'd fallen. And I was still standing. I didn't parade my new title. I didn't redecorate Cypress Point in marble and chandeliers. I didn't buy a red convertible and speed down River Street like some 90s rom-com widow. I just lived. Quieter. Calmer. And more honestly than I had in decades. I still went to therapy. Still attended my pottery class. Still lit a candle for Walter every Thursday night. I'd sit on the porch, look over the lake, and whisper, "You gave me the space to come back to myself." Because he did. In a way Derek never had. Walter didn't give me power to wield. He gave me power to choose. People started asking if I was going to retaliate, sue Derek, fight for more, drag him through the mud like he'd done to me. But why? He was already living it. The business deals that vanished. The board seats that went cold. Sierra, once bold and golden, quietly backed away 3 weeks after the will was read. Word was she moved back in with her sister in Raleigh. As for Derek, I heard through Naomi that he tried to launch a new firm. But no one would back it. Reputation matters in Savannah, especially when you bite the hand that owned the land. Then came the text. 2 months after the will reading. Unsolicited. Simple. You really ruined me. No greeting. No remorse. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed, "You did that all by yourself," and hit send. No block. No scream. Just the truth. And I never heard from him again. One day, I ran into Zoe, Derek's daughter. She wasn't part of any of this. She was 23, freshly out of college, newly employed, and still figuring out where she stood in all the wreckage. We sat down for coffee. She looked nervous. I didn't know what to say back then, she said. I didn't want to take sides. You didn't have to, I said. You were a kid caught in a grown man's mess. She exhaled. I'm proud of you, she said. No one ever taught us what strength looked like. But now I know. I smiled. Not because I needed the approval, but because something in her voice told me, maybe I just rewrote the story for the next woman watching. 3 months after the cabin became mine, I threw one last party. No caterers. No planners. Just a few friends, paper lanterns, and a playlist I made the week Derek left. I stood by the fire pit, wine in one hand. The last photo of me and Derek in the other. We were at Marlowe's Bistro. The night he told me he needed space. I looked at that woman. Tight smile. Hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a blow. And I whispered, "You survived it. You beautiful, brave thing." Then I dropped the photo into the flames and turned toward the lake. I didn't win. This wasn't about winning. This was about walking away. From lies. From manipulation. From the version of myself who believed love had to be earned with silence. These days, I live slower. Sunrises with strong coffee. Evenings with jazz. Long walks barefoot through wet grass. I read again. I paint again. I laugh again. Sometimes I look out across the lake and smile at the absurdity of it all. He really thought I wouldn't notice. He really thought I'd just disappear. But instead, I reappeared. Not louder. Just realer. So here it is. If you're reading this, wondering if you're allowed to start over, let me say it plainly. You don't need permission. You don't need a will. You don't need a breakdown. You don't need revenge. You just need to choose yourself. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just once. And then again. Until your life starts to sound like your own name again. If this story touched you, share it with someone who remembers those days too.